I never imagined that forgetting to change my shirt would cost my son his engagement. But looking back now, I realize it revealed something far more valuable than any marriage could have provided. Let me tell you who I am, and why that Tuesday evening changed everything. My name is Robert Morrison, though everyone calls me Bob. I'm 65 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been spending my Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the Riverside Community Center in Seattle, teaching math to underprivileged kids. Before you think I'm some saint, let me be clear. I do it because I love it. These kids remind me why numbers matter, why problem-solving matters, why perseverance matters. What those kids don't know, what most people don't know, is that I founded Morrison & Associates back in 1989. We specialized in operational efficiency consulting for tech companies. I sold the firm in 2022 for a sum that generates roughly $95,000 a month in passive income. I live in a comfortable but modest townhouse in Fremont, drive a 12-year-old Subaru Outback, and spend my money on things that matter to me: education, charities, environmental causes, and making sure my son David never had to worry about student loans. David, my boy, 32 years old, sharp as a tack, working as an investment banker at Sterling and Hawthorne. He'd done well for himself, and I was proud. But lately, I'd sensed a change in him. He'd become more concerned with appearances, with status symbols, with impressing the right people. That change, I suspected, had a name: Alexandra Sterling. They'd been dating for 8 months. I'd met her twice, briefly. Both times she'd been polite but distant, her smile never quite reaching her eyes when she looked at me. David had mentioned her family owned some businesses in Boston, but he'd been vague about details. I hadn't pushed. My son was an adult, making his own choices. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, around 4 p.m. "Dad, tonight's the dinner," David said, his voice tight with what I recognized as stress. "What dinner?" I was reviewing calculus problems for my 6 o'clock session. A pause. "Dad, the engagement dinner. I told you about it 2 weeks ago. Alexandra's parents are flying in from Boston. They're only here for one night." My stomach dropped. I pulled up my calendar on my phone. There it was, highlighted in red. Engagement dinner, the Arctic Club, 7 p.m. I'd completely forgotten. Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Arctic Club, 7 p.m. I'll be there." "Dad, please." David's voice carried a pleading edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager asking to borrow the car. "Please dress nice. This is really important to me. Alexandra's parents are. They're particular about these things. Can you wear the navy suit, the one we bought for Uncle Frank's wedding?" Something in his tone bothered me, but I pushed it aside. "I'll look presentable, son. I promise." "Thank you. And Dad, maybe don't mention the tutoring thing. They're very traditional. They might not understand why you're still working at your age." I felt a flicker of irritation. "I'm not working. I'm volunteering." "Right, exactly. But maybe just, let's keep the conversation light. Talk about the firm, your career, that sort of thing." After we hung up, I stared at my lesson plans. I had 90 minutes before my tutoring session, then an hour to get home, shower, change, and drive to downtown Seattle. Tight, but doable. What I didn't anticipate was Marcus. Marcus Williams was 16, brilliant with numbers but struggling with everything else. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father wasn't in the picture. Marcus was my success story, my proof that talent exists everywhere if you just give kids a chance. At 5:45, 15 minutes before our session was supposed to end, Marcus broke down. "I can't do this anymore, Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice cracking. "I got into MIT, full scholarship, but my mom says we can't afford for me to go. Even with the scholarship, there's living expenses, books, travel. She says I need to stay here, go to community college, help with the bills." I glanced at my watch. 6 p.m. If I left now, I could make it home by 6:30, be dressed by 7, and arrive only fashionably late. But Marcus was crying, 16 years old, and watching his future slip away. I made a choice. I sat back down. "Tell me about the expenses," I said. "Let's run the numbers together." We talked for an hour. I explained financial aid, work-study programs, emergency funds. I made some calls to colleagues who ran scholarship foundations. By 7 p.m., Marcus had a path forward. He was smiling again. I looked at my watch. 7 p.m. The dinner had started. I was wearing khaki pants and a blue polo shirt with the Riverside Community Center logo on it. I hadn't shaved since morning. I smelled faintly of the whiteboard markers we used in the classroom. I called David. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I made a decision. I'd go straight to the restaurant, apologize for being late, and explain. These were going to be my son's in-laws. They'd understand that sometimes life intervenes, that helping a kid in crisis matters more than punctuality. Looking back, I was incredibly naive. The Arctic Club is one of Seattle's historic landmarks. All dark wood and leather, the kind of place where tech money meets old money, and everyone pretends they're in a century that values both equally. I'd been there perhaps a dozen times over the years for business dinners. I knew the dress code. I knew I was violating it. The host at the entrance looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "I'm here for the Morrison Sterling party," I said. "I know I'm late, and I apologize." He consulted his tablet. "Are you a guest of the party?" "I'm the groom's father." His eyebrows rose fractionally, but he recovered. "Of course. Right this way, sir." The private dining room was in the back, up a short flight of stairs. I could hear laughter as we approached. The host opened the door, announced Mr. Morrison, and stepped aside. The laughter stopped. The room was elegant, intimate. A table set for 8 people, though only 6 were seated. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. A bottle of wine I recognized as costing more than most people's car payments sat half empty on the table. David was at the far end, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Next to him sat Alexandra, a blonde woman in her late 20s wearing what was probably a designer dress. Her expression shifted from surprise to horror in the span of a heartbeat. On the other side of the table sat who could only be her parents. The father was about my age, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my Subaru. The mother was perfectly coiffed, diamonds at her throat and wrists, her face frozen in an expression of polite shock. And next to them, 2 more people I didn't recognize. Another couple, younger, probably mid-30s, dressed with the same expensive perfection. "I'm so sorry I'm late," I said, moving into the room. There was a situation with one of my students, and I couldn't leave him in distress. No one spoke for a moment. Then the silver-haired man, who I assumed was Alexandra's father, stood. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Charles Sterling. This is my wife, Victoria, and our friends, Jonathan and Rebecca Ashford." We shook hands. His grip was firm but brief, and I noticed him glance at my community center polo shirt. "Please, sit," Victoria said, her voice carefully neutral. She gestured to one of the empty chairs. A server materialized, pulling it out for me. I sat. David wouldn't meet my eyes. "I apologize for my appearance," I said, addressing the table. "I came straight from the community center, where I volunteer. One of my students had a crisis, and I made the choice to help him rather than leave on time. I hope you'll forgive the informality." "The community center," Charles repeated. "How admirable. What sort of work do you do there?" "I teach mathematics. Calculus, mostly, but also algebra and geometry for the younger students." I caught Alexandra whispering something to David. His face had gone red. "That's very charitable of you," Victoria said, and something in her tone made the word charitable sound like an insult. "David mentioned you were retired. It must be nice to have so much free time to give back." "I enjoy it," I said simply. "These kids have tremendous potential. They just need someone to believe in them." A server appeared at my elbow. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" "Water's fine, thank you." Charles had returned to his seat. "David's told us so little about you, Robert. May I call you Robert?" "Bob is fine." "Bob. Tell us about your career." "David mentioned you worked in consulting?" This was it. The moment I could set things straight, explain who I was, what I'd built. But David's earlier words echoed in my head. "Let's keep the conversation light." "I did, yes," I said. "I ran a small consulting firm for tech companies. Operational efficiency, that sort of thing. I sold it a few years ago when I decided to retire." "And now you teach children," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. The menu sat untouched in front of me. I picked it up, scanning the options. The prices weren't listed, which meant they were astronomical. "Have you ordered?" I asked. "We were waiting for you," Alexandra said, and there was an edge to her voice. "Though we've been here for over an hour." Again, I apologize. The situation was urgent. Jonathan Ashford, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. What kind of crisis requires an hour at a community center? Surely the parents could handle it. I met his eyes. The student was considering not accepting a full scholarship to MIT because his family couldn't afford the additional expenses. We were working through his options. "MIT," Charles said. And I heard genuine interest. That's impressive. For the student, I mean. Good for you, helping out like that. The way he said helping out made it clear he thought I was doing glorified babysitting. David finally spoke. "Dad, maybe we should order? I know you must be hungry." I realized what was happening. My own son was embarrassed by me, by my clothes, by my lateness, by my volunteer work. He wanted me to be quiet, to blend in, to not embarrass him further. The server came around, taking orders. Everyone ordered complex dishes with French names. When he got to me, I looked at the menu and ordered the simplest thing I could find. The grilled salmon. "Just the salmon, sir? No appetizer?" "Just the salmon, thank you." After the server left, Rebecca Ashford, who'd been watching me with open curiosity, spoke for the first time. "Bob, you mentioned selling your consulting firm. If you don't mind my asking, what do you do with your time now? Besides the volunteer work?" It was a trap. I could feel it. She was giving me an opportunity to brag, to establish my worth, to prove I belonged at this table. I didn't take it. I read, I hike, I spend time with friends. I'm trying to improve my cooking skills, though I'm not very good at it. And I volunteer twice a week with the kids. "How modest," Victoria said. And again, the compliment felt like an insult. "You know, our foundation does quite a bit of charity work as well. We donate to several educational initiatives in Boston. Perhaps you've heard of the Sterling Educational Fund?" "I haven't," I admitted. "We gave over $2 million last year to various schools and programs. It's important to give back, don't you think? Though, of course, some of us give our time, while others give their resources." The implication was clear. My time was worth less than their money. Alexandra placed her hand over David's. "Darling, didn't you mention your father lives in Fremont? That's such a diverse neighborhood." David nodded mutely. "We considered buying a property there as an investment," Jonathan added, but ultimately decided the area was a bit too transitional for our portfolio. The conversation continued around me, but I'd become a spectator rather than a participant. They talked about their properties in Boston, their vacation home in the Hamptons, their boat. Alexandra mentioned a shopping trip to Paris. Victoria discussed their country club. When the food arrived, I ate my salmon in relative silence. It was overcooked. Then Charles asked the question that changed everything. "Bob, I have to ask. How did you manage to put David through school? Banking isn't exactly a cheap degree, and I know Seattle University isn't inexpensive." "I saved," I said simply, "and I made some good investments over the years. But working at a small consulting firm, retirement funds can only stretch so far, especially in Seattle's market. You must have been quite frugal." I understood what he was really asking. How does a man who now teaches free math classes afford anything? David jumped in. "Dad's always been good with money, very careful, very practical." "Practical," Charles repeated. "That's admirable, though I imagine it must be challenging, living on a fixed income in this economy. Retirement isn't cheap." "I manage," I said. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Bob, I hope you won't think this is inappropriate, but if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I mean, once David and Alexandra are married, you'll be family. We take care of family." The table went quiet. Even David looked shocked. She thought I was poor. They all did. They thought I was some retired consultant living on a meager pension, too proud to ask for help, spending my golden years teaching underprivileged children because I had nothing better to do. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could correct them. I could mention the $95,000 a month. I could drop the name of my firm, let them Google it, watch their faces change. But something stopped me. I thought about Marcus, crying because he thought he'd never escape poverty. I thought about the assumptions these people had made about him before ever meeting him, based solely on his zip code and his mother's job. I thought about my son, sitting there embarrassed, too concerned with what these people thought to defend his own father. "That's very kind of you," I said to Victoria. "I'll keep that in mind." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Dessert was served. Port was offered. I declined both. The conversation flowed around me, occasionally including me in ways that made it clear I was the charity case they were tolerating for David's sake. At one point, Alexandra's mother pulled out her phone to show pictures of the wedding venue they were considering. It was an estate outside Boston, available for only $500,000 for the weekend. "Of course, Bob. We wouldn't expect you to contribute," Charles said quickly. "We know this is far beyond what you could manage. Consider it our gift to the young couple." "Very generous," I said. When the check came, Charles didn't even let it reach the table. "This is on us, of course." Our treat for finally meeting David's father. After dinner, we stood outside the restaurant. The Seattle night was cool, typical for March. David and Alexandra stood apart from me, talking with her parents. I walked over to say goodbye. "Thank you for dinner," I said to Charles and Victoria. "I appreciate you making the trip." "Of course," Victoria said. "Though I must say, Bob, I do hope next time we see you it might be in more appropriate attire." I understand tonight was an aberration, but first impressions do matter. David winced but said nothing. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had he started valuing what people wore over who they were? "I'll keep that in mind," I said quietly. As I turned to leave, I heard Alexandra's voice, not quite whispered enough. "Oh my God, David, I thought you said your father was successful." "He's basically a homeless person who teaches math to kids." I didn't turn around. I just kept walking to my Subaru, parked 2 blocks away, next to a Tesla and a Mercedes. The drive home took 30 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I just thought about the assumptions people make, about the values we pass to our children, about what really matters. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. "David." I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. The text messages started coming. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Please call me. Let me explain." They didn't mean it the way it sounded. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my living room. On my bookshelf sat a photo of David at his college graduation, beaming, his arm around my shoulders. That felt like a lifetime ago. My phone rang a 3rd time. This time, I answered. "Dad." David's voice was thick. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have defended you." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." They just assumed, and I didn't know how to correct them without making it awkward, and then it spiraled, and I'm sorry. "David, do you remember why I sold the firm?" Silence. "I sold it because I'd made enough money. More than enough. I sold it because I wanted to spend my time doing something that mattered. Teaching kids who need help. Being there for the people I care about. Living a life with purpose instead of just accumulating more wealth I'd never spend." "I know, Dad." "Do you? Because tonight, you let those people treat me like I was nothing. You let your fiancé call me basically homeless. You let them offer me charity. And you said nothing." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll talk to them. I'll explain everything." "Explain what, exactly? That your father has money, so therefore he's worthy of respect? That's the lesson you want them to learn?" "No, David, I don't care what they think of me. Truly, I don't. But I care very much about what you've become. When did my son start measuring people by their bank accounts instead of their character?" The silence on the other end was answer enough. "I need you to think about what you want out of life," I continued. "Not what looks good. Not what impresses people like the Sterlings. What actually matters to you. Because if you marry into that family, you're marrying into those values. Alexandra's not like them. She's different when we're alone. Is she? Or does she just hide it better? Dad, please, don't make me choose. I'm not making you choose anything, son. I'm asking you to choose for yourself, consciously, with your eyes open." I hung up. The next morning, I went to work. Real work. The work nobody knew about. I got dressed in a suit, the navy one David had mentioned. I drove to my office in a building in South Lake Union. Morrison and Associates might have sold, but I'd kept my stake. I was the silent partner in 6 different ventures. I sat on 3 boards. I had meetings scheduled with portfolio managers and investment advisors. By 11 a.m., I was sitting across from James Chen, the CEO of Chen Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in cloud infrastructure. "Bob, good to see you," James said, shaking my hand. "Thanks for making time. I wanted to discuss the Q2 projections." We talked for an hour. Chen Dynamics was one of my success stories, a company I'd helped grow from 12 employees to over 200. I still held 20% equity. At noon, James mentioned something interesting. "By the way, we're finalizing the investment from Sterling and Hawthorne, $3 million for our expansion into the Asian market. Should close next week." Sterling and Hawthorne. Charles Sterling's investment bank. "Tell me about them," I said casually. James shrugged. "Old Boston money, conservative investors. They're giving us decent terms, but they're sticklers for appearances. The managing partner, Charles Sterling, personally reviews every deal, very hands-on, very particular about who he works with, very particular about appearances. An idea formed. James, how badly do you need their $3 million? He looked surprised. "Well, it would accelerate our timeline, but we're not desperate." "Why?" "Because I think we might want to reconsider that partnership." I spent the afternoon making calls. By 5 p.m., I had a clear picture. Sterling and Hawthorne wasn't just involved with Chen Dynamics. They were investors in 4 of my portfolio companies. Not controlling stakes, but significant ones. Enough that if those companies suddenly found alternative funding, Sterling and Hawthorne would lose not just future returns, but current prestige. Charles Sterling's bank was successful, but not as successful as he pretended. They were leveraged. They needed deals like Chen Dynamics to maintain their reputation. I didn't make any moves. Not yet. I just gathered information. That evening, David came to my house. I opened the door to find him standing there, still in his work clothes, looking exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in. We sat in the living room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I broke up with Alexandra," David said finally. I looked at him, surprised. "I thought about what you said, about values, about what kind of person I want to be." He rubbed his face. "Dad, I've been an idiot. I've been so focused on climbing the ladder, making the right connections, impressing the right people, that I lost sight of everything you taught me. Tell me what happened." "After you hung up last night, I went back to the hotel where her parents were staying. I told them the truth about you, about the firm, about your investments, about everything. And you know what Alexandra said? I waited. She was relieved. She actually said, 'Oh, thank God.' I was worried we'd have to support him someday. Not 'I'm sorry we misjudged him.' Not 'I feel terrible about how we treated him.' Just relief that you weren't actually poor." David's voice cracked, and her parents laughed. "They thought it was funny that you'd pretended to be poor. They wanted to know why you didn't correct them, like it was some kind of test you'd set up. They couldn't understand that you just didn't care what they thought." "And what did you say?" I said, "That's exactly the point. That you didn't care because their opinion doesn't define your worth. And that I didn't want to marry someone who could only respect people once she knew their bank balance." He looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I let them treat you like that. I'm sorry I became someone who cared more about appearances than substance." I pulled my son into a hug. "I forgive you," I said. "But more importantly, I'm proud of you. Making that choice, walking away from what looked good to do what was right, that took courage." We talked for hours that night, about values, about success, about what kind of life was worth living. David told me about the pressure he'd felt at work, the constant competition, the need to project success. "You know what's funny?" he said around midnight. "I make good money, really good money, but I'm still broke every month because I'm trying to keep up with people like the Sterlings. Expensive dinners, expensive clothes, expensive apartment. I thought that's what success looked like. And now I think success looks like my dad, teaching calculus to teenagers and driving a Subaru, genuinely happy with his life." The next week, David gave notice at Sterling and Hawthorne. He took a position at a smaller firm, less prestigious but more aligned with his values. The pay cut was significant, but he downsized his apartment and started living within his means. As for Charles Sterling, I never did make those calls to pull funding from his deals. I didn't need to. He was small, ultimately. Just a man trying to feel important by making others feel small. But I did make one call. I called Marcus. "Mr. Morrison?" His voice was surprised. "Marcus, I've been thinking about your MIT situation. I want to help. I'm going to set up a fund to cover your expenses. All of them. Room, board, books, everything." Silence. Then, "Mr. Morrison, I can't accept that. That's too much." "You can, and you will, but there's a condition, okay? When you graduate, you come back. You spend 1 year teaching at the community center, helping kids like you, pass it forward. That's the deal." More silence. Then the sound of crying. "I'll do it," he said. "I promise. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me. Just make the most of it." 3 months later, I attended Marcus's high school graduation. He gave the valedictorian speech. He talked about teachers who believe in you, about opportunities that change lives, about paying it forward. David came with me. Afterwards, as we watched Marcus celebrate with his mother, David said, "This is what it's about, isn't it?" This right here, I agreed. The true story is simple. My son learned that respect can't be bought, only earned through character. I learned that sometimes the best lessons come from letting people reveal themselves. And Marcus learned that one person believing in you can change everything. What city are you listening from? And have you ever been judged by someone who didn't know the whole story? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. We share real stories about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something, because that's when it matters most.